Yo, what's up? Mike your Mentor here. Welcome to Man Up Friday. Hope you guys have been having a good day. Really excited to jump into this next chapter in what we've been talking about on Man Up Fridays. So, welcome. Show me a little bit of love if you would. Punch that like key. Share this with some other men because we're going to be talking about some powerful stuff tonight. And if you're watching live, hashtag live. If you end up watching the replay, hashtag replay. And then leave those comments down below. I appreciate you guys and you guys helping me spread this message and get this out here. So if you're new to this page, welcome. This page is my way to give back. It's my passion. It's my mission to help men answer the higher calling they have in their lives as husbands, as fathers, as friends, and as leaders in the community. And the reason I'm so passionate about that is because I grew up without a father, and I went through a lot of difficult emotional and mental barriers and circumstances and tragic situations because of that. And the good thing about that, though, is I've gained a lot of wisdom over the years as I've dealt with this, and now I can look back and I can see how manhood has been eroded over the generations to where it is now. And I'm a firm believer that when you turn on the news, when you look in the newspaper, when you look outside and you see all the chaos that's going on in the world, it's a direct result of men not accepting responsibility for the position and the stewardship that we've been given in our lives. And I'll share a little bit about my story tonight when we get into this, but you know, I was at a bad place in my life and I needed help. I needed somebody to come alongside me and to say, hey man, I get it. I understand. And I'm gonna show you something, and if you're open-minded, this is gonna change your life. And I was open-minded, and they did show me, and that's what I talk about here on Friday nights. And it's this program that I went through called The Quest for Authentic Manhood by Dr. Robert Lewis. And we've been going through this here on this page every Friday night since the first of the year, or the 7th of the year, whatever. And we've talked about a lot of things, and about, as men, how we have to look back at our past and face these wounds that have been planted in us if we're able to move forward. And hearing all this information for the first time, it revolutionized my life. It changed my life completely. It got me out of that bad place I was in. It gave me hope, because the stuff that we go over and we talk about on these Friday nights, they don't teach us in school. And the only way that you find out about this is through coincidence like me, or if you're actively out there searching. But I don't think a lot of men are. I mean, I know for a fact that a lot of men are. They have an idea of what they want and what they hope, and they believe that there's a better way, or that there's something missing, but they just don't know where that is and where to get it. And until someone brings it to you, or you discover that on your own, man, you burn a lot of bodies along the way. You cause a lot of damage. And I did that in my own life. And now that I know this information, it's my duty, it's my responsibility to share it with anybody else who will listen, because it will have a profound effect on your life. And I'm so grateful that I came across this. So that's what we talk about here on Friday night. So welcome. Typically 9:30, getting a little bit later start tonight because I was on a phone call, so I had to push this back. But I'm glad you guys are here with me. So let's jump in to tonight and see what we got. Right. Let me share my screen with you guys. All right, here we go. Okay, so this week and next week, maybe there might be a couple more weeks after this, might be 4, but this is part one in this series called A Man and His Wife. So usually I have a fancy little backdrop up there. Excuse me, I'm going to turn something else on a minute, just so I can see, try to respond before we get into this. But usually I have a fancy backdrop, but this week we are just keeping it real simple, and I'm sharing this picture with you guys. Here we go. Alright, of me and my wife. And this is from the day we got married, you know, and it's interesting, and I talked about this last week. And as men, when we think about getting married, when we think about having a relationship with our significant other, and then we, especially in Western society, right, we prepare, and we may go through marriage counseling, and we may find the place we're going to get married at, arrange the food, the guest, and deal with all that, right? Like, our minds are somewhere else. Our minds are, they're focused on all of those things. And it's very likely that we're thinking about the long-term ramifications of the decision that we're making and everything that comes along with it. And when we're up there on the altar in front of the pastor and we're sharing our vows, no matter what those vows may be, one, that goes by at the blink of an eye. I remember my wedding day. It went by so fast. It was crazy. It was like one thing after another. It was like a blur, but not a blur. I mean, I can remember everything that happened, but it just went by so fast, and there was never no time to like stop and really enjoy it. Well, I shouldn't say there wasn't, but it was, you know, if you've been married, you know, there's all the stuff that goes along with that. It's not like it's just you and your wife in a room, and it's just you two, and you're just focused totally on that. So the other interesting thing is when you're up there and you say those vows, how often do you ever think about those vows again? And most likely for men, that's the only time in your life that you're going to say those vows. So right, it's this thing that happens on this one day, and then we move on with our lives. And rarely do we give any thought to that, because of life and because of everything else that's going on. So, you know, I've shared this whole story in the past, and I'm just gonna share a little bit about it here as we get into the context, because I think it sets a good context for this, right? Because of Hollywood, because of Facebook, social media, because in our society, in the world, we tend to romanticize everything. For the most part, when we think of marriage coming up as teenagers and as young men, we don't think of that as being hard. We don't think of that as being difficult. We don't think of that as being challenging. You know, I like to tell guys that are going through things and struggling, you know, to keep fighting the good fight, because that's exactly what it is. It is a good fight, and marriage takes work, and you really don't hear a lot about that until you're in the thick of it and you're battling to fight for that marriage, to fight for your wife, to fight for that relationship. And some of us, we don't face that battle until we're years deep in our marriage. Some of us, for whatever reason, we jump into that battle right away, and that was pretty much my story. And it's my story because I'm not going to go into a lot of details of what happened before, but I wasn't honest with my wife about something before we got married, and I lied about it. And then we got married, and then 2 weeks into our marriage, the first part of this lie came out, and my wife confronted me, and I told her the partial truth at that time, and she left. She wanted a divorce. She wanted to have our marriage annulled. And the people that have been watching this and been along with me on this journey, uh, how hurt I was by my dad leaving. And here I was, uh, with my wife having left for that night. Um, and all my mind could think about is I'm going to be just like my dad. I'm going to be a womanizer. I'm going to be divorced. I'm not going to be around my kids, and they're not going to be around me. All these crazy thoughts were going through my mind, and I didn't know what to do. Uh, so I did. Well, I shouldn't say I don't. I did the only thing that I knew to do, and that was to pray. And so I threw myself in a snotty, uh, with tears coming out of my eyes, down on the floor, and I just prayed to God and said, God, I'm blowing this, and I don't know what to do. And this is only 2 weeks into our marriage, and He spoke to me. And this was the second time in my life I audibly heard God's voice, and He said to me, did you make a promise or did you make a covenant? Now, a promise is obviously different than a covenant. A promise is something that you mean well, but you might not necessarily keep that, right? A covenant is deeper than that. It's something that can never be broken. And when you're getting married and you're before the pastor, you're not making a promise to your wife. You're making a covenant. And it's not only between you and your wife, it's between you two and God. Or at least that's the way that I look at it, and what I believe. And God asked me that question, and I told Him, I said, I made a covenant. So then He said, all right, go wherever she goes. And I'm like, what do you mean, God? Like, she left. She ain't coming back. And literally, like 5 seconds later, my wife pulled back in the driveway, and I went downstairs, and she told me that she didn't want to get a divorce, that she would give this a chance, but we needed to move, and we needed it was going to be hard, and a whole bunch of other stuff. So we ended up packing everything up that next day. And I told my boss, and I don't think I told anybody else. And we moved back to Chicago, where she had lived for the previous 5 years, maybe 10 years. And we went on this journey to try to make it work. And I can't speak for my wife. I know that it was difficult for her. I know it was extremely difficult for her. But for me, yeah, it was difficult too. It was freaking tough. There were times when I would come home from work, and my wife would have all her stuff packed in the middle of the living room, and she'd say, I just can't do this. Like, I don't see any hope. I don't see any reason. Like, you did the one thing to me that I told you never to do, and that was lie to me and betray my trust. And I would have to like try to talk her off this proverbial edge, right? I would have to not defend myself, but I would have to talk about, why it was worth keep fighting, why I was worth the fight, like. And it's interesting looking back on this, because right, all that came out of the insecurities that I had never dealt with about being abandoned by my dad and feeling rejected. So here I find myself in the one situation where that rejection and that abandonment is being triggered in a way like it's never been triggered before, like even more than when my dad left me. And I'm scrambling, I'm fighting, I'm triggered, like, and I'm just laying it all on the line, like, please don't go. And my wife, she would decide to believe in us. She would decide to believe in me, and we would keep going on. And we rode that roller coaster for I don't know what she would say, but man, easily 9 of the 12 years that we've been married. So it hasn't been easy. There's been a lot of marriage counseling along the way. There's been a lot of growing up that I've had to do. There's been a lot of things that I've still had to work through. All these things, right? So I say all that to say that, like, I like I know, like, this is boots on the ground. I know what it's like to work and to sacrifice and to um, live out what God tells us to live out as husbands. It's the only way that our marriage could have survived. It's the only way that we would have gotten this far. Not to say it's because of me, because my wife had just as much, uh, not responsibility, but she had a part to play, right? And she had to choose if she wanted to play that part or not. And she chose to play that part, thank God. But us doing that together, um, but me having to deal with my insecurities and dealing what I was responsible for, right? So when I talk about this stuff, like, this stuff is coming from the heart, man. Like, it don't get any realer than this. And I think as we go through these next slides, I hope that they encourage you. And my hope is that if you're at a rough spot in your marriage, or you've been through the battle, because it's not a matter of if, it's only a matter of when. And it might be, if you're lucky, maybe it's once. But like any relationship, there's good times and there's hard times. That these will give you the tools to better effectively deal with that, and to bring more unity, more joy, more happiness in your marriage, because that's God's gift to us, and that's how it's supposed to be. So, all right. So let's take a look at a key verse for husbands or future husbands, and it's 1 Peter 3:7. I gotta take this thing off a second. I can't read. All right, and that says, "Husbands likewise dwell with them with understanding, giving honor to the wife as to the weaker vessel, and as being heirs together of the grace of life, that your prayers may not be hindered." 1 Peter 3:7. So the first thing I want to address in this verse is probably the glaring part of this sentence that a lot of people misunderstand. And it says, "as to the weaker vessel," right? And if there's any women watching this right now, because I know sometimes women check this out, uh, you know, or some guys may be saying, "well, what do you mean weaker vessel?" And he wasn't talking about emotionally. He wasn't talking about um, spiritually. He's talking about physically. Because it doesn't matter who you are, there's physical differences between men and women. And one of those is women are not created as strong as men physically. It's just the way that our bodies are. And that's what he's referring to. He's not referring to them, he's not talking about them emotionally, intellectually, spiritually. He's talking about that being physically. And that's obviously, that's a profound difference between men and women, and one that can just as easily be celebrated. So the next thing to point out is this phrase, "in an understanding way," right? So what this is encouraging us to do as men is to study our wives, and study our wives deeply. So I want to ask you a question. If someone, how can I say this? How well do you know your wife? Do you know her deepest fears? Do you know her passions? Do you know her regrets, if she has any? Do you know her dreams? Do you know what she would change if she could? Do you know what she struggles with? Are you actively studying your wife? Are you studying what she likes? Are you studying what she reads? Are you studying what makes her happy? Do you know her love language? Right? Does she like words of affirmation? Does she like physical touch? Does she like gift giving? Does she like quality time? You know, all these things. So this is an encouragement for us to study our wives deeply and know them deeply and intimately. Secondly, the phrase, and grant her honor, right? Honor. This is a word that has been lost in our society. Honor. Not just, that's appreciation for who she is and who she was created to be. Doesn't necessarily mean you guys see eye to eye all the time, but to be able to step into her shoes and understand maybe why she thinks the way she thinks, or why she sees the situation the way that she sees it, and to honor that, and to honor her for who she was made, or for who she was made to be. And then next, fellow heir, I think I spelled that wrong, fellow heir in grace of life, right? So this is speaking to the woman's self-worth, right? Her equality with us as men. And we're going to talk about this here on the next slide. Then we're going to take or in the next slides, and we're going to take a look at some of the models for marriage in today's society, and then one model for marriage, or the ideal model for marriage, and what that should look like. And there's a big lack of understanding today of that equality and that worth, and what that looks like with regards to our wives. And I believe that comes out of that comes from generations past, and just what manhood has gone through. You know, when we take a look back at the way society started off with men working the fields and always being home and being around, to men going into the Industrial Revolution and then being taken out of their homes for hours at a day, then going through the world wars to where men were not only taken out of their homes, they were taken completely out of their families' lives for months and years at a time, only to come back and be physically present, but to be emotionally and intellectually withdrawn. What did we expect from women, right? They had to step up and do what we weren't capable, or we couldn't do at that time. And unfortunately, a side effect of that was this thing of inequality, and women had to, through feminism, had to try to regain what was rightfully theirs, and that's their equality with us in a lot of aspects, just about every single aspect. So next, all right, the three models of marriage. So the first one is the top-down traditional marriage. I'm going to read a little verse for you here. I'll pull this up. Luke 22:25 through 26. So check this out. It says, "And he said to them, the kings of the Gentiles exercise lordship over them, and those who exercise authority over them are called benefactors. But not so among you. On the contrary, he who is greatest among you, let him be as the younger, and he who governs as he who serves." So what does that mean, and how does this, or what does this top-down traditional marriage look like? Well, this marriage, what it looks like, and what they were talking about in this verse is coming against, was the husband's position. So in a traditional household, the man is looked at as the king, right? This is my house. I'm the man of the house. Yes, true, but all the things that come with that, right? And this is, what type of leadership style do we see in this traditional marriage? We see lordship. And I'm going to show you a diagram in a minute that will bring some clarity to this. But you know, when somebody rules or has the Lord type leadership style, you know, they're a dictator. They're telling everyone else what to do. They don't lead by example. You know, they give commands, and when the commands aren't followed, uh, you know, there's consequences, and they can be swift consequences. And the goal in mind with this traditional type of marriage is personal benefits. Like, what can I get out of it? Not what can I give to it, what can I get out of it? What are, in essence, my servants doing to please me today? What is my wife doing to please me today and to make my life better? And the effects on the marriage, there's usually a winner and there's usually a loser. Depending on what type of household you grew up in, I think of my household, and in some ways, I lived with my mom half my life, and I lived with my grandparents half my life. My grandpa had a big influence on me. He was a great man, but like many men, just like myself, he had his faults. And one of the faults, if you would, was his marriage to my grandma was representative of this type of top-down traditional marriage where he gave the orders and my grandma would fall in line, and when things didn't go like that, then there was a winner, which typically was my grandma or my grandpa, and then there was a loser, which was my grandma. And that can play out in a lot of different ways, right? Today, that can play out in physical abuse. It can play out in emotional abuse. It can play out in even spiritual abuse for some men who use God's word to put their wives in place or keep their wives in a certain place, right? And one day they're going to have to answer to God for that, and that would scare the living shit out of me. So here's what that looks like. We got God at the top, and then we have the husband underneath God's authority, and then we have the wife underneath the husband's authority. Now we have the next model of marriage. This is the 50-50 identical marriage. And we see more of this in today's society, right? For a multitude of reasons. Because of the push for equality between men and women in a lot of different areas. And as a result, we get this 50-50 identical marriage. So I want to read this next thing to you. Galatians 3:28 says, "There is neither Jew nor Greek. There is neither slave nor free. There is neither male nor female. For you are all one in Christ Jesus." So how does this play out in the identical 50-50 identical marriage? One, the husband's position, he sees himself as a partner. The leadership style is there is none. It's leaderless. Because if it's a 50-50 identical marriage, then there isn't one person making the ultimate decision or leading the direction of the family. And the goal in mind is equality. Nothing wrong with that. But the effects on marriage is it's difficult. It's a difficult balance with hard falls because we're going to talk about this. You know, the difference between leadership and headship. I talk about this all the time because it's so profound, and it's the calling that we as men have on our lives, and it's just been lost. And as a result, this leadership piece gets abused to no other. So when there's a 50-50 marriage, there is no clear leadership. There is no clear direction. There is no clear headship in the home. And that can cause a lot of friction. And that can cause a lot of issues. And, you know, I'd say that this is, for the most part of my marriage, this is what it's looked like. And it's caused me and my wife a lot of headaches, because this idea has fed into my passivity as a man, and also at it's created an unbalance between passivity and and responsibility, and that can lead to resentment. That can lead to anger. That can lead to unfairness. A lot of these different emotions that come out of this as you try to balance the equality in the marriage, and in deferring to the other person, and looking to them to make maybe the decision. And here's a model of that. We have God, and then underneath God we have both the husband and the wife, who are equal. So now we're going to look at the third model, the side-by-side biblical marriage. And that's Ephesians 5:23, 25, and 31. So check this out a minute. 5:23. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for her. So if you don't know anything about the Bible, if you don't know anything about Jesus, Jesus died on the cross because of what he believed in, and what he believed in were his followers, his people, the people of the world, which were also known as the church. And 25, I'm sorry, I backed that up. 23, I skipped 23. For the husband is the head of the wife, as also Christ is the head of the church, and he is the Savior of the body. Husbands, love your wives just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for her. And then 31 says, for this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife. It doesn't say the woman will leave, it says the man shall leave. Right? Initiative, responsibility, action, decision. And then I love this part here. For the husband is the head of the wife. What does that mean? Well, let's take a look at that. So the husband's position is as the head. And this leadership style reflects responsibility and sacrifice. So here's where people get confused today. Typically, when people have a misunderstanding of what it means to be the head of the home, they're equating that with leadership. Leadership and headship are not the same thing. Leadership is a gifting that God places in you. Some people, they say, are natural born leaders, right? Their gifting in that area is higher than others. And we could argue and discuss, is that born? Is that, can you build on that? Can anybody become a great leader? We're not here to discuss that, but we need to take note of that, right? You may have a wife who's been gifted in the area of leadership, but that is not headship. Headship is a calling, and it's a calling from God, and it's placed and given specifically and only to men. And what that looks like is responsibility and sacrifice. And here's a perfect analogy for this. And one of my mentors, Scott Prickett, taught me this. He was in the Army. I believe he was a tank commander. And I don't know if you've seen the movie Fury, but it gives you a good visual. So in the movie Fury, Brad Pitt is a tank commander. And there's 3 tanks, right? So he's a tank commander, he's in front, and then you have the 2 tanks behind them. And they're going through this town at night, and what they don't know is that they're going into an ambush. The enemy is waiting there for them. Now, as the tank commander, your job was to be in the first tank, right, leading the way. And whenever you came into an ambush or came into a battle, the job of the first tank, and these guys knew the responsibility that came with this, their job was to draw all of the enemy's fire. If that meant they had to die so the other two tanks could get away safely, then so be it. That was the responsibility they accepted. That was the sacrifice that they were willing to make. And that is the picture of what headship looks like. And that is why, and that, I should take that back. And that is what's given to men. God didn't give that to women. He gave that to men because it's a calling that we have on our lives. And that's what we're supposed to do in unison with our bride, is take that responsibility. And if that means we got to lay down our lives in whatever area, in whatever way, then we're called to do that. And I don't know how that plays out for you in your marriage. There's been times in my marriage where something's been said, and all right, you can either choose to be quiet and let that thing be said and let that blow over, or you can choose to not let it blow over and go on the attack mode and blow your marriage up and cause strife and cause division, right? In that little moment, you're choosing to die, right? You're making a sacrifice. And it's not to say that wives don't do that either, but I'm just using that as a concrete example within a marriage of what that looks like. And there's many other ways to sacrifice. Do you need to not work so much and spend more time with your family? Do you need to not golf so much and spend more time with your family? I don't know, is your wife asking you to give up a hobby or give something up for the greater good of the family? Whatever that looks like, right? That's where the sacrifice comes in. So just some things to think about. So the goal in mind of this is oneness. And we talk about this when we say our vows to our wife when we're in front of the pastor, and he talks about that, right? And two shall become one. And the effects on marriage when there is this responsibility accepted by the man in the headship area, and there is sacrifice that is lived out and that is shown, what that does to a marriage is it creates health, it creates happiness, and it creates harmony. And that's what I had to learn. And I'm not saying that, I'm not tooting my horn here. I'm just saying that I blew my marriage up at the beginning because I wasn't walking in headship. So I had to make that choice. God told me what I had to do. Wherever my wife goes, I need to go. Okay. There's sacrifice there. There's responsibility for what I did. And I went and I tried to walk that out. I try to walk that out every single day. Some days I do good. Some days I fail miserably. But that doesn't mean I take my eye off the ball. That doesn't mean I take my eye off that calling on my life. And it doesn't mean that I abandon that calling on my life. So here's a quick model of what that looks like. We've got God at the top, right? We've got the husband and the woman side by side underneath God. But what you'll notice, right, is both the husband and the wife are getting direction in relationship from God. But the man is called to be the head. Therefore, he is to be under authority to God, and then he is supposed to demonstrate God's love to his wife by being the head, right? This whole relationship, this whole responsibility and sacrifice part. And it goes back to what we read in Ephesians, right? Just as Christ laid down his life for the church, we are to lay down our lives for our wives. And sometimes that can be one of the hardest things in the world to do. And when you're, I don't know, when your wife goes off on you about something, and you just feel it coming up from inside, and you just wanna, right, confrontation. All right, let's go. Let's take this to a 10 and explode all over them. And you know, that male ego, right? You want to challenge me? You want to go there? Okay, let's go there. Let's do that dance. That's a dangerous line to dance on, my friends. Because at that moment, every word that comes out of your mouth can't be taken back. And things can go nuclear pretty quick. So I guess it comes down to a personal choice. How do you want to live? What do you want your marriage to look like, right? How have you treated your wife in the past? And I'm not here to judge anybody. I'm not here to condemn anybody. It's never my goal. But my goal is to speak the truth. And the truth is that we have this calling of headship on our lives. And then it's our job to use that responsibly and to do something with it. And it's interesting because I can think of two clear conversations that I had with two guys who were experiencing some turmoil in their relationships, and just how powerful it was for them to finally realize that they had not been living this headship part out, and the stuff they had done to their family and to their wives as a result. And then for them to recognize that, and then to make a choice to change and to move forward and to get back to living that, right? To living that out. You want to change your marriage, you want to change your family, you want to change your kids, you want to leave a legacy for your kids and for your grandkids, and you want to change your family tree, step into your headship and watch as things fall in line. Because no one wants to live under a dictator. No one wants to live under somebody who can't make a decision or lead the family appropriately. But when your wife sees you sacrificing, when your kids see you sacrificing and laying down your life, however that looks like, in those particular situations, it just does something to the heart, man. Just puts everything back in balance, back in life. So that's it for tonight's Man Up Friday. Hope you guys enjoyed that content. Next week we'll dive a little bit deeper into part 2. Just want to ask you guys again, if you're getting something out of this, please let me know, and please share this, with a brother, and let them know what's going on in this page, because this isn't about me. I have no desire to be famous. I have no desire to hear praise. What I do have a desire, though, is to go behind the lines, go down in the trenches, get next to my brothers, speak truth into their life, help them become better husbands, better fathers, better friends, better leaders in the community. Because as men, when we resume that responsibility that we've been given and steward it correctly, this world's going to change and nothing's going to stop it. So that would be my encouragement to you. That's the mantle you've been given. Pick it up and run with it. If you need anything, hit me up. Love you guys. See you tomorrow. Peace.